On this episode of the show, I have with me Mike Hanson. He is CTO at Clockwise, and we're going to be talking a lot about how LMs are really good at understanding us. And I think a lot of you who have interacted with tools such as ChatGPT or other tools that are consumer facing have noticed that it is a lot easier to ask questions than your traditional search engine. And that extends to a lot of other things. And we'll understand a little bit about how people have traditionally interacted with computers and talk to Mike a little bit about how UI might be changing to support some of these shifts and expectation changes and a couple other things if we have time. Mike, thanks for taking the time.
Glad to be here, Amir. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, can you tell us what Clockwise does?
You bet. Clockwise is a company that makes the world's most powerful scheduling brain. It integrates with enterprise calendaring systems to make more focused time and address complex multi-party scheduling challenges to make time for what matters. We have a new MCP server that integrates with ChatGPT and Claude, allowing users to express complex multi-party scheduling challenges in natural language. And it figures out how to optimize the schedule, move events around, get people into the same time and place so they can have the meetings they need.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So this episode, we'll be talking a little bit about how humans and computers interact and how some of that's changing with the advent of these LLMs that are now mainstream. I guess let's talk about the historical interaction with humans and computers. It's not always been easy. Sometimes getting a computer to do what you want requires us to be very specific in the ask and the way also you make that ask. And, talk to us a little bit about some of these historical constraints we've seen.
You bet. So, from the earliest days of, interactive terminal-based computers, humans have had to learn how to translate their goals into the language of the computer, to use commands the computer could understand in order to achieve the goal they wanted. That has always proven to be fairly difficult, and many people have trouble figuring out how to translate what they want into something the computer can do. Now, if we go back to the invention of graphical user interfaces, it was a huge leap forward, right? We could present visual artifacts and lists of commands that helped the user understand what the computer could do and how they could tell the computer to do it. And it led to a huge wave of innovation, which was great. But still, we, with all of our graphical user interfaces, whether mouse or touch-based, the user needs to figure out, how do I use the commands the computer is exposing to me to achieve my goal? Now, with these language-based systems, we have this really exciting potential to turn that around and to turn it upside down, so that the computer is understanding what the user wants and figuring out how to align that with the set of capabilities it has.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, I guess, when we're talking about what we've quickly gotten used to, right? I think a lot of people have experienced this in the form of ChatGPT or similar type tools from a consumer perspective. We have gotten very comfortable at falling into storytelling with a lot of these tools. And I guess, humans are at their nature very good at storytelling. That dynamic alone has also required years of getting us to this point. I guess talk to us a little bit about, the notion that these LMs now are good at understanding our stories, but also it has been a while in the making.
Yeah, it has. I've worked on assistant systems for a long time. And what we found was that when you tell people they could talk to a computer, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they naturally fall into a storytelling mode. They talk about what they need, what they're doing, who they're doing it with. And only after that failed did they start adopting the telegraphic imperative, hey, computer, do this style of interaction that those early assistance systems required. And it felt unnatural. People don't like it. I mean, there's research that shows that people will treat computers as social entities, whether you want them to or not, and it's kind of rude to give orders. What's different about now is that that natural tendency to tell a story about what you need, about what you're doing, works because a dialogue-based large language model system with a lot of context and enough memory to remember what you were talking about is able to accumulate that story and to map that story into a set of actions that translates the user's desire into a thing the computer can do. And we're discovering that this works across all sorts of domains. Translating into computer code, translating into a series of tool calls, translating into a series of queries that then get fed to summarization. All of these are working with humans in a way that the human brain is just more comfortable. And it works with our social instincts too. We don't need to give orders. We can express our desires. And obviously, because these dialogue-based systems have received reinforcement learning to tell them to satisfy these desires, it will then translate it into a series of steps that gives us an outcome that makes us happy.
It's interesting. As we've been using these tools more and more, I love testing and playing with them as well. And I've noticed that this notion that storytelling has been a part of the way humans communicate has now become a natural way that I communicate with a lot of these products. And then when I go to traditional search and I try to adjust my communication style again, I catch myself telling a story to the search engine. I'm like, it's not really going to help. It's just probably not going to completely understand it. It might a little bit. So I have to then adjust the way I'm interacting. And I've even grown accustomed to using pictures and videos as prompts. I mean, obviously, pictures worth 1,000 words, so it's even easier to convey more volume of data points and intent and context. When we're looking at humans who are now using a lot of these tools in their everyday lives, whether it's just email or something basic or whatever it is, it's people are using it. We see the numbers, the statistics out there. Is that shifting the expectations of how you interact and then within the UI getting a response back? Is that causing a change in how people expect systems to interact with us?
I think it is. I think it's happening. I think it's going to be a little slower than those of us who work with the tech every day expect. But I think it is starting to show up in a lot of different products and a lot of different expectations. And of course, the key word here is context. Pictures are full of context. Storytelling is full of context. And it's context both in the moment of all the things that are happening in the image or all the words that are happening in your storytelling. And it's also context over time as you have more and more interactions with these systems, and they build up a memory of how you have interacted with them in the past and have the naturally, usually correct assumption that you want to continue to interact with them in the same way going forward. Sometimes we call that memory. But the challenge, the thing for people designing the systems, if you are trying to construct a digital system that is going to respond to users and increase their satisfaction, which is really what it boils down to, it's always hard to map what the user expresses into the universe of possible actions you could take. This is most obvious in a search engine, right? We get 3 or 4 words. We have to look at 1 trillion possible documents and identify 7 because we know that people don't look beyond the 7th one. That's really hard. Anything you can do to increase context makes that experience better. And so, 10 years ago, we might have looked at location. We might have looked at previous searches. We might have looked at what you were more likely to click on in the past in order to try to build a contextual re-ranker that could allow us to say, oh, this user's probably looking for this, so that we can increase your user satisfaction. But now, with the ability to elicit so much contextual data from clues that are present in the user's interaction, and in dialogue-based systems where we now have permission to ask for clarifications if we need more context, our ability to zero in on what the user really wants and then to give interpretability, to explain what we thought the user wanted, allows us to just go so much more quickly to figuring out what is the series of actions that will make this user happy at this time. It's a quantum leap. It's so much more powerful.
Do you think, and I'm going to maybe take a step back in the Wayback Machine here. I remember a time when, at the time, Facebook, they put out their app, and you heard everyone in enterprise go, oh, we need to take a little bit of a hint and a clue of what people want. We need to shift enterprise apps to look like what people look like, the socialization of them. I guess when we look at this expectation of now what we're getting with this prompt and response, it's obviously very different when you have certain data that you're interacting with and certain UIs and where they fit in. And we're asking people to potentially use a human in the loop type scenario and get this feedback. And then, whether it's on the side of something, I mean, the UI in which we're supposed to get comfortable with where these LLMs plug into applications is shifting. This expectation from the consumer now, I think, has grown tremendously because this is all we're seeing. When you look at the shift that UI might take, have we even begun to start incorporating those shifts within products? Are we still trying to figure out what that UI and how that relationship of LLM response and human interaction is going to look like?
Yeah, that's a good one. Couple thoughts there. I remember when everybody looked at Facebook and was like, oh, we need to do this. And there were some good lessons and there were some not so good lessons. Certainly one of the lessons was everything needs to be a feed. Well, yeah. I think that was wrong.
I remember that.
Not everything needs to be a feed. Feeds are useful sometimes. But it turns out, there are other UIs that are also useful. Tables and grids have a place in the UI. But the idea that humans work in groups and that humans are probably really important to the user interface and that communication is key to the task was important. And I think that has become so integral to the way we use computers now that it's almost hard to remember that there was a time when most software didn't know there were other humans. Now, I'm going to pause here and note that the chatbots that we're using are largely single player. And this is an area where, in my work at Clockwise, I have been very excited by the potential of adding multiplayer, because a lot of work challenges and a lot of non-work problems too require coordination between multiple humans. That's part of getting work done, is figuring out how to work with other people. And I'm very excited about what's coming in the next couple of years as we figure out how to add social teams, multi-person coordination into these language-based user interfaces. There's a huge set of problems that have to be worked out. Authorization, trust, the keeping of secrets, but also the soft skills of when is it appropriate to contact another human? What do other people need to know and when do they need to know it? That is coming. And my guess is that we're going to have to adopt new architectures to make it work. It's not enough to throw everything into a single context window and let the LLM hash it out where the end users can see it, because sometimes you need to have information that isn't shared with all parties. You may not be in an environment of complete trust. And so this is where we get into multi-agent systems. where you might have an agent that represents knowledge that is not what's available to all the parties. And so you have sort of a neutral agent in the middle that considers what's happening and then explains to each of the parties what the range of possibilities are. That piece is coming, and it's very exciting as we figure out how to deploy multi-agent systems, or using the architectures of today, probably to deploy tools and MCP servers that encode those more social requirements on the back end.
Absolutely. I was curious to ask you, obviously, I know you guys have your own product. I consider that a much more narrow focused solution. And obviously we're seeing lots of attempts at wider, AGI, wider just overall solutions to the market. I did read an interesting quote out there that said, we're very focused. The US is very focused on solving this wider problem, this AGI component, whereas some other countries are more intent on narrow AI use cases, getting them injected more into daily lives, bringing some of that added value much more immediately at the potential sacrifice at the wider, bigger picture. When you look at this conversation of narrow versus wide AI, I think a lot of people interact with narrow AI and don't realize it. It's almost invisible to them because it's easy. But this thought of AGI, this wide AI, it is now terrifying, because when I put out content and we talk about some of these bigger concepts, people don't necessarily like them. I get negative reactions a lot to that type of content. When it's narrow and use specific, I notice there's a different look of, oh, that seems familiar. In your case, Clockwise, you guys have a very, narrow solution. It brings value and it makes people's lives better in certain ways. You can actually document that, talk about it. This concept of, focusing more on narrow versus wide. I mean, I have my own thoughts, but I am kind of curious when given that you're building that product, narrow versus wide, what are your thoughts there with what you're seeing in terms of the bigger scale development out there?
Yeah, so I have spent much of my career working on what I think we would characterize as narrow AI. I came up through human-computer interaction. My goal was always to figure out how to make the complexity of the system comprehensible and usable so that end users could, use the product, achieve their goal, and feel like they got some value. And I continue to be very excited about the role of large language models and, dialogue-based systems to solve focused, narrow problems. The ability of these systems to scale up to larger problems was something of a surprise. The degree to which reinforcement learning through human feedback on top of a large language model allowed us to create deeper and more powerful structures within the large language model certainly surprised me. Now, the limits are quite visible if you know where to look. And I think it's no secret that they're not scaling as well as it looked like they might a year or two ago. It's, clearly some of that is because they were learning a lot from the training data. The training data gave them a whole lot of examples. And to a certain degree, what we're seeing is people who I think are discovering that the scale of what has been incorporated into the models means that there is a useful example somewhere in the training data for many, many problems you might throw at it. But it's not hard, if you know how to push on these models, to push them to a point where they're off the map. And when they go off the map, when they don't have training data, their ability to generate new solutions is sometimes less impressive. My main concern with this entire domain is it's very hard for a non-expert to understand where these systems can be trusted to give a good answer and where they can't. And because language generation is so key to the output layers of these models, they're perfectly plausible and coherent regardless of whether their solution is high quality or not. So I continue to be mostly concerned about the problem of appropriateness of this tool for this problem, given that it is very hard for a user to determine whether it is or not. Because the failure modes are subtle and frankly kind of hard to spot. And it is intrinsic to the nature of these models that they can't know when they have left the domain where they have lots of training data. And so I am cautious about the deployment of mega models that can solve everything, because I feel like it's very easy to make unsupported claims and very hard to know when you have left the domain where those claims can be supported. I'm not willing to say that the systems will not continue to get better, but I am cautious about the rate of progress, and particularly cautious about how to deploy these things to end users for general use when the applicability of the tool for some of these problems is not as high as it might seem on first blush.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I actually, we'll stay with enterprise software because obviously you guys have a tool that's going to be integrated with other software and with other projects and other, I don't know how your agent will go out there and take care of things, but I'm sure it's a whole episode in itself. And what's really interesting to me is we're at this inflection point that people are in such a rush to almost develop a solution, then go find a problem to solve. Whereas I know what you guys have done. I actually think I've had some people from Clockwise on in the past, so I'm very familiar with the company. You guys have been solving a very particular problem, and you've now just brought the next evolution of that solution to market. And I think that's a very different way of solving with this technology versus going, I know it has power, I just haven't quite figured out where, when, how. And, I keep talking about this MIT study of, 95% projects failing. I think there's a reason. I don't think this is accidental. If anybody would have thought that we're going to be batting 95% on the good, has not followed technology for the last 50 years, let alone the most bleeding edge technology that we've seen in the last 10, 20, I don't know. We could put a number on it. We could debate that on another episode. But I feel like what you guys have done is very interesting to me. I think it actually serves as a good model of how to approach this version of the technology.
Yeah. And so look, you look at the problems that real users have in the real world. Mostly, it's about trying to get information from system A or person A into system B or person B after performing some manipulation on it. Like, that's, for many people, that's their life, right? And we've deployed these systems. We've built these big enterprise systems with databases and native front ends and web front ends and message buses and queues and all the rest of it. But still, users spend a lot of time frustrated that the thing they need is hard to get at. And these LLMs, together with technology like MCP, are actually, I think, really quite good at solving that problem. That if I can say something, if I can go to my enterprise assistant system and say, you know, hey, I've got a really important meeting next Friday. I need you to clear my schedule all Friday morning and give me 2 prep sessions with the people on the team that I'm going to be needing to work with on that. And check the task tracking system. And if I'm marked as a reviewer on anything this week, figure out how to set up a half-hour meeting with all those people early in the week so that we can get that out of the way. Like, that's a scenario that works today. Like, go talk to Linear, figure out the tasks, go look at the org chart, look at the calendar, use a scheduling backend in order to figure out how to set these meetings up, put the events on the calendar. Done. And that is a real world scenario that today requires a lot of clicking around and looking at table views and figuring out who you need to talk to, and then flipping over to your calendaring app and moving, playing Tetris, moving the boxes around, which is, largely busy work. So it's like, I'm not sure we necessarily need to solve the problem of AGI in order to eliminate a lot of busy work.
That's fair. I like that. I think that's a great point. And I think the technology will get easier as well. I think just the course of how technology works, it will get easier, and solutions will be simpler to deploy, develop, all those things. I think it's just the nature of technology. I mean, if you do want to go to the cloud now, it's easier now than it was 20 years ago. I mean, it's just what happens in technology. Tools get developed to make things easier. That's what we do.
That's what we do. It's engineers showing up every day.
There you go. I love it. Well, I love this episode, Mike. I think people might have some questions, whether it's about the product, whether it's about something specific to the episode we talked about. Is there a good way of touching base? Is there a good way of getting in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is best. And so we'll put that in the metadata for the article. You can reach out to me there on LinkedIn. And I'll keep an eye out for questions from folks out there. Always happy to engage and hear what people are thinking.
Absolutely. I definitely appreciate your time. Thanks for the conversation today.
You bet. Thanks. It's been fun.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. We'll be back again. Different guests, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, obviously, this is a great episode. We did talk about some of the historical challenges of people interacting with computers, and talked about how our nature of enjoying storytelling lends itself well to a lot of these LLMs out there. And we talked a little bit about how the UI is shifting and changing, and narrow versus wide AI, a couple other things in there. So please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit or enjoy it as well. I appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.